All right, so we are adding in a little last-minute addition to this video because just before it was to be released, a new beta patch of the game came out, of Fury of Dracula came out. Thanks to the team at Nomad for putting a lot of work in to get that done. They've done a lot of bug fixes, a lot of interface improvements, things that just really make the game more intuitive and easier to play, especially for new players. So I think it's been a big improvement. They're still working on just ironing everything out, but it's been a big change. But there are a couple of aspects of this that, rather than just being bug fixes or interface improvements, actually do affect the game balance pretty significantly. And I would say three of those things are significant buffs to Dracula. One of them is a pretty significant buff to Hunters, and it remains to be seen how this is going to change the game balance. Like we've actually been seeing in tournaments that there's about a 50-50 win rate for Hunters and Dracula. And once these changes take effect, that might change. We'll have to see. It's going to be a longer process to see how that plays out as people adapt to the new game rules. But the changes that happened, the first one is, well, actually all of them are making the game work more like the physical board game is supposed to. Out of the ones that affect Dracula, the first one, and probably the most noticeable one, is that now there's a house rule, but so technically it's like an option, and the default is still the way the digital edition used to be. But I think that the community is going to move towards using this house rule as the default because it is the way that the physical board game is supposed to be played. Yeah, and you hope so, of course.
It's more interesting,
stronger.
And it's like more interesting where to play.
I think it is. Yeah, it does make things more interesting. It makes Dracula stronger, but that's balanced out by some things with Hunters. But the rule is that previously in the digital edition, Dracula would have to place his next hideout or power card, whatever, on the trail, and then the last card on the sixth base of the trail would slide off and mature or just become a lair or whatever. And this meant that it took 7 turns from Dracula moving to a location before he could move there again, or before he could use wolf form or hide again, or just before he could mature something. And now it's only 6. And that sounds like it might sound like a minor difference, but it's actually a pretty significant difference in how strong Dracula is, how often he can use his powers, return to lairs, and even just the fact that maturing something before having to move might be the difference between winning a close game and losing it. So that's a big buff to Dracula.
I think this affects quite a lot. Like not only your Dracula powers and most importantly wolf form. Let's be honest. Is that 1 turn less on the trail, so you can you need to evade hunters 1 day less, which is a big deal. Puts a little bit more stress on hunters to find you, surround you, and kill you if you used wolf form. But also like feed and hide, a little bit important. But also vampires can clear locations, and so your map can be much more open. Also, the secreted soil can mature sooner, so maybe you can move through sea that little bit further. Maybe hoax will mature first before you move, so you can see what you can pick and decide your strategy and direction a little bit later. Maybe wolf or mob or spy will mature first. You will see items or reaction on hunters, Maybe one hunter will not reveal any weapons. Maybe one hunter will discard a lot of stuff to mob or discard something important or nothing, and they will see their stuff to the spy. And suddenly you realize, hey, I don't need to run away to the sea. Hunters cannot contest me. I continue on the land and all of that.
So this is a big buff to Dracula all around. But in terms of how it affects starting locations, I think the biggest factor there is it makes it easier to play a lair strategy. And as you're going to see once we get to the Baltica portion of this video towards the end, that the East is probably the best place to do a lair strategy. So if anything, this change is probably going to propel even more Draculas to start in the East. And for more on that, you'll get to the end of this video and you'll hear lots about it.
Let's start building lairs 1 day earlier. That has 2 really big benefits, and both are really hard to express. They seem minor, but they're really important. One is that you need to build a smaller loop to come back to the lair, which increases your flexibility and increases you how you can build your trail to go back to the lair, and it gives you much more freedom. You're not so constrained, and second, basically, your lairs start kicking in one day earlier, and like dealing with those two vampires, for example, with a rumor token, one day can be a lot of time.
So yeah, big buff to Dracula again. It remains to be seen how this will affect the meta, but and just for context, in case it wasn't clear, the way that it can work now that we've just been discussing, where the trail slides and then Dracula moves, that's how the physical board game rules state the game should work, and the digital edition previously implemented it wrong. But it may turn out that this makes Dracula too powerful. We'll see. There's a lot that remains to be seen.
What I'm most excited, wait a second, because what I'm most excited for, because we touched the East, but the East was strong enough already. But what this change actually makes is it actually enables England start.
It does make England stronger, yeah, because you have to move one fewer time to return to the same location, and because England has so few locations, well, in fact, it has 6 locations.
It is, yeah, like I played a lot of England. I basically started playing Fury of Dracula by playing England over and over again for weeks, and from time to time I come back to England and I have a lot of fun in England. You can do quite like wild stuff there, even in the all digital, very limited version. But a lot of England strategies were really bad just because you lacked that one move. You were able, that one vampire matures sooner, unlocking your half of your your like cities to come back to, or one day earlier going back to your lairs, for example, in Swansea and Liverpool. So you need to do some awkward, I don't know, dark call to just damage yourself for nothing. Suddenly, England, that you are not constrained by some inability to move, it can be really dangerous for Helsing there, it can be, and I'm excited to test that.
Yeah, again, it's still pretty new that this beta's been out, so lots to discover here, but I agree, when you're watching the Britannica section of this video, keep all this in mind. A lot of what we're saying doesn't necessarily apply to the new, what may become the new meta with the new rules that people are playing with. Now, the change that most directly affects starting locations, actually, I think, is it's another change that makes the game work more like the physical board game is supposed to. Dracula can now see his 5 opening encounter cards before placing his initial location. That's a big change, because before he had to go somewhere, and then on his first move, then he would finally see his hand. So you had to go somewhere and hope that it would work. So maybe you decide to go to Athens, hoping that you're going to draw a vampire or a hoax, and you just don't, or you draw the hoax, but you don't draw a saboteur or a bats or whatever, and you've kind of, again, going to an extremity location is never a bad start, but you don't get what you hoped, and you can't build your starting strategy around what's in your hand. So now you can. That's a big help to Dracula. And actually, one of the things that I think we might see from this, or at least I'm interested to see if it happens, is are we going to see more Ireland starts because of that?
Yeah.
Because suddenly, if I draw my opening hand, I see I have a fog, I have a aristocratic vampire, and I have a hoax. Now suddenly Ireland starts to look pretty tempting, because there's a very good chance I can mature the hoax and then the vampire by means of protecting with the fog, and that,
or at least one of them, right?
Yeah, but I mean, imagine like if you can mature a 7-point vampire and a hoax, that is a huge start to the game. That might be well worth losing out on a couple of turns of encounters when you're at sea. So that's my bet. That's what I think we're going to see, is more people, not a huge number of people doing Ireland starts. I still don't think it's going to be a super strong competitive tournament start, but I think we might see more of them.
Yeah, I think this change is very juicy and tasty.
Oh yeah,
because it opens more thinking for Dracula and planning, and also sometimes maybe more reads from Hunter side. It is a little bit less of random stuff, in a sense that also in my opinion, East, one of the second very important strength for Dracula, apart from how easy it is to build Lerder, is that it doesn't matter what encounters you have, East is always good.
Right.
Because whenever hunters go and search them, they spend a lot of time. But if they don't reach the encounters and they don't search them, but oh no, you have poor matures, what do? You do theirs. And there's no bad answer there, right?
Yep.
Whatever happens, you're in a good spot. But if you go to some extremities like Italy, Amsterdam, or the Ireland you mentioned, and you don't have the necessary mature encounters, you're just in a bad spot. It is really bad for you, and having that, it really can enable other locations to get that to shine, right? That it is not a wild roulette. And what is more important, also quite interesting, we didn't touch on that, on the Spain region too much when Hunter starts not in Madrid but in Bordeaux.
Yeah.
But when the Spain is open and you have in your hand something worth maturing, hoax or a vampire, and a bats, and you put them in Cadiz or Granada, it is extremely hard for that lone hunter to deal with it without forewarned. It is almost guaranteed mature.
Yeah.
And you don't need to see move after that, like in Ireland.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that's a start that we again, it's called the Pizza Wizard start. If you go watch Scott Sword's Hunter starting positions video, you'll see that mentioned. It's not a start that I think either of us are that big of a fan of, but Pizza Wizard did win the tournament with it. I think that says more about his skill as a player than the start itself. But either way,
I think it's a bit of both. Because he was still able to adapt to his own start, like by himself. He didn't have the vast experience of every other video and other players, right? Because with other sides, it is that little bit easier.
Yeah. Anyway, okay, so the third change that is a buff to Dracula, it's a bit of a smaller one, and it's not so related to starting, but we'll just mention it briefly, is that Forewarned has been nerfed. Because Forewarned is a card that lets hunters cancel the effect of an ambushing encounter card. And previously, any hunter that was affected by the ambush in some way could play Forewarned. So, for example, let's say the encounter is in Marseille. Lord Godalming moves into Marseille, and Dracula does not ambush. And then John Seward moves into Marseille also, and Dracula ambushes, and it's an unnatural fog. In that instance, previously, if Lord Godalming was carrying a Forewarned, he could play Forewarned to cancel the effect of the fog, because it's a card that affects both of them by delaying them both and trapping them both in the city. Whereas if it was a card like Sagani Bodyguards that would only affect Seward, in that case he would not be able to play it because he's not directly affected.
He was able to play always.
Wait,
yes.
I thought it was only if the hunter with Forewarned was affected.
Any hunter in a location was able to forewarn any encounter in that location.
Well, either way, that was an error in the digital edition that's now been fixed, and now only the hunter who's actually the one being ambushed can play Forewarned.
Yeah.
That's huge because, again, fog is Dracula's #1 way of protecting himself, especially in the late game.
From massive combats.
Yeah. And now, from multi-hunter combats. And now, hunters actually have to think very carefully about which hunter is going to carry Forewarned, because before, they could just always have it on Godalming. If Godalming moves into a city and finds Dracula, then even if Dracula doesn't ambush with the fog right away, the other hunters can come in and Godalming can still play Forewarned to stop the fog. Now, they really have to think hard about who has that Forewarned and who's the most likely to get ambushed and who's the most likely to find Dracula. So it's a big nerf to Forewarned, and that's a big buff to Dracula.
And especially big buff to the fog, because it is actually serving now the safety tool that it is supposed to serve in the first place. Because with the previous Forewarned, how often really Dracula counted on protecting himself with fog.
Yeah, in the late game, hunters always have at least one forewarned, usually, and so he can't reliably
sometimes it was just sometimes it was just bad luck, and sometimes, as Dracula were saying, maybe it was bad luck, maybe they didn't roll for warrant, so maybe I will fog, and sometimes it worked, right?
It was at the point where really Dracula had to have a double fog in order to reliably protect himself. And sometimes even that could not be enough. But anyway, point is, that's now been fixed. Now fog is a lot stronger. So again, big buff to Dracula. Now all this sounds like
one single bad spot. It does actually can affect starting locations in a sense that if there are those extremely risky locations that we talked, like Italy, you can die week 1, week 2, right?
Yeah.
That England, that you basically go into the fight because it is so tight. Ireland also, because you go through the sea and you land with low health. Landing is very difficult, especially with Dracula, with Hunter events. It can be easily narrowed, so you can be found quickly. So there are a lot of simple, deadly dangers, and fog can actually help with that, to manage that risk of those most risky stars. And again, so this is, in my opinion, 2 out of 3 changes actually drag Dracula a little bit away from the east and open them up, because in my opinion, a lot of others, it's not like east was so super strong that it trumped others. In my opinion, simply a lot of other locations were not that really good. That was their issue.
And yeah, that's true. These changes do open up more options. So now all these so far have been things that make Dracula stronger. So it might sound like the new patch is tilting things heavily in Dracula's favor. And again, maybe that is the case. We don't know yet. But the one change that's really significant that is a buff for hunters that, again, resembles the physical board game rules now, is that, so previously in digital, whenever hunters were in combat with Dracula or with a vampire, Dracula could see exactly how many combat cards they had in their hands. That means cards that can be played in combat. If Dracula knew that a hunter had a horse, a fast horses, and then got into combat with them with a vampire or whatever, he could see, it would say that they had, to simplify things, it would tell him that they had 2 combat items in their hand. That was the usual thing, because usually they have a knife and a heavenly host, or a rifle and a pistol, or whatever. Now, someday, if Dracula would see that they only have 1 combat item, that's a big amount of information, because now he knows that they're either weaker, or maybe they're carrying something like a holy bullets or a stake. But either way, it gave Dracula a lot of information about the condition of hunters' hands, and that's the most important information that Dracula needs that he doesn't get just from watching the board. So the change now is that basically no longer exists. Dracula knows how many cards a hunter has in their hand, and he knows that just from looking at the main interface, but he no longer has any information about what is in their hand and whether it is a combat card or not. So that is a huge buff to hunters, because now Dracula has to work much harder to get that information using cards like wolves, rats, spies, saboteurs, and so forth.
Is it a huge difference?
Don't you usually
know what hunters have, in a sense, like, okay, they want horses, knives, rifles, heavenly hosts, and
you know what they want to have, but previously you would know when they didn't have that stuff. Now you just have to kind of guess.
I was just trapping you. That this is the most important stuff. Actually, this is very key what you mentioned. That usually hunters were running pretty well equipped, and that didn't give you information. But sometimes there was the situation when hunter jumps on you, you open the screen and see, oh, they have only 1 combat, or sometimes 0 combat items. This is such an easy combat for me right now.
And that changes how you play, for sure, because
definitely
that tells you, oh, I can probably kill this hunter if I stick around.
Or just wallop them heavily, or escape as bots easily, right?
But so what this does, one of the things this does, it reduces the usefulness of combat vampires as ways of finding out what hunters have, because it's no longer possible to check a hunter's combat hand size by by ambushing them.
Yeah.
But in terms of starting locations, I mean, I think the one change that this is likely to make to Dracula's starting locations is that you might be a little bit more reluctant as Dracula to do an aggressive start because, again, you don't have quite as much ability to spy on hunters' hands, essentially. Like, you're working with less information, potentially, and that might make you more cautious about an aggressive start where you're likely to be running into hunters. So possibly the Britannica starts, some of the Eastern starts tend to be heavy on hunter combat, or like a Southern France, Barcelona not start, things like that.
I think it specifically, in my mind, affects a lot the East again, and it is a little bit of a nerf to the East because when I'm playing Dracula and I'm playing on the East, I usually don't bother even in week one to protect myself that much with encounters. I can stay on Hoax and Aristocratic, and encounter week one jumps on me. I'm happy, especially with horses. I just check. Do they have a stake, right? I just open the screen and I see, oh, they don't have a stake. My fighter vampires are safe. Oh, if they have a stake, they have only one item, then I am safe, right? And this is fairly easy. And imagine now you're just wandering around, especially like maybe Szeged or Belgrade, and hunter race on you. You don't even know if they have a horse.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it is a completely different game. Suddenly, you need that encounters, and suddenly, like putting yourself up front to check what hunters have is not that easy because sometimes you will pay with your health for that because you just, oh, they have knife. Now I know because they just knifed me, right? And this, I think this is very interesting. I played with the new, on the new balance patch only once as Dracula and 3 times as hunters, and I already saw the difference. My vampires were dying in combat with hunters because they didn't know if they have a stake or not, or if they were fully equipped.
Yeah, it's big. And sorry, I just had a thought that I lost track of, but
yeah, I talk a lot.
Yeah. But anyway, those are basically the 4 balance related changes that came with this new beta. So as of the viewer watching this video, that is now how pretty much everyone on the Discord is playing. I think the only reason that people are not is because it's only available on computers, not on the smartphone version of the game. So people who have to play on the phone still have to use the old version, but it seems like it's catching on. People are very eager to test it, and I think that the trail movement variant is going to be adopted and become the default. So just some context here, and with that, I think we can go on to the main video. All right, hello everybody. This is a special feature from JB Philly and my Fury of Dracula content. If you don't know what Fury of Dracula is, it's a board game. There's a digital version of it. And I am going to be talking about strategy for the Dracula team, Dracula side in Fury of Dracula. And here with me is a very special co-commentator, co-strategist, and very highly regarded Dracula player. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, that's me. That's a really very honorable introduction. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, well, you didn't introduce yourself, but I guess you need no introduction. As we can see, we have
you're right. I missed that. So here is WcKaczek. I'm the prominent Dracula player, let's say, that put a lot of effort into making Dracula great again, and killing as many hunters as possible along the way.
He has killed many hunters, many hunters. Yeah, so anyway, we have stolen a lot of credit with this. Just goes to Scott Sword, another community member of the Fury of Dracula online community and YouTuber. I've stolen his PowerPoint template here, so thanks to him. And he also did a video on hunter starts, which I would recommend going. Well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself here. But again, this template is stolen from him. Lots and lots of inspiration taken from him and all the efforts that he's made into welcoming new players like myself.
But basically, he inspired us, to
exactly
put our asses into work and do the counter guide, let's say.
Yeah, he's getting us to make something of ourselves here, and we're doing that by teaching you all about Dracula starting positions. So, in terms of background material, this video does assume that you know how to play the game Fury of Dracula. If you don't, you can definitely find some good material on YouTube to teach you how. It assumes that you kind of know the basic rules, that you know the basics of the kind of meta, and most of all, meta meaning the meta game in terms of like the very basics of how people play. That means things like fast horses. If the phrase horse economy doesn't mean anything to you, you should go back to YouTube and find a video by either Scott Sword or Quincy Morris that explains hunter movement and horse economy. So if that kind of thing is new to you, then we would recommend you brushing up on that before watching this video, because this will assume that you're familiar with those kind of basic metagame principles. I would also recommend that you first watch Scott Sword's video on hunter starting positions. I think it is just called hunter starting positions. So if you haven't seen that yet, I would pause this video here, go and search for Scott Sword's video on that, watch that, learn what he has to teach you, and then you'll understand this video better, because what we're discussing here is going to rely kind of on the knowledge of what hunters usually do with starting positions. Dracula at the beginning of the game is very reactive. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, because Dracula picks his starting location after hunters, so you need to have kind of an idea what hunters are doing, right? If hunters surprise you, you may be simply not prepared. But on the other hand, if you have some feeling of the game and basic principles, not only what to do but why, I think then you can adapt to almost any, no matter how surprising hunter starting setup.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like you said, Dracula is reactive at the beginning, and so that's why it's important to understand where hunters will be in order to understand why Dracula should start where he does. All right, so I'm assuming now that you have watched those videos that you know what horse economy is, and you're all ready to go. So we have here kind of an example starting setup. It's actually you can see that the hunters are in some very odd places. So if you are familiar with the kind of meta of hunter starting setups, you might be wondering what the heck is going on here. What's going on is that I just had the in-game AI, play as the hunters here just to get an example screenshot. Don't do what the AI does. Don't start hunters in these kinds of places. But the first thing, before we actually get into the specifics of starting locations that we wanted to talk about, is some general theory on the first location that you place. So this right here, this first card that does not have an encounter on it, that's Dracula's first location. And usually, I think most of the time, Dracula players will misdirect that location on their third turn. So once Dracula has placed his two locations, once he's placing his third one, he can play misdirect, which lets him take a location off the trail and place the misdirect card in its place. So essentially that's wiping out any encounters that might be there, but it's also preventing hunters from discovering his trail, and it's letting him move back to that location. So if you misdirect, you're then taking that location off the board, allowing yourself to move back into it. And a lot of the time, hunters or Draculas will do that so that they can, for example, start in Cologne or maybe Brussels, move to Amsterdam, place their first encounter in Amsterdam, and then misdirect Cologne or Brussels, and then move back out to that same city, so that they can, proceed along their merry Dracula way. Same thing would apply if you're going from Valona to Athens, back to Valona. You have to misdirect Valona in order to be able to walk out of Athens. Usually, I think the majority of the time, hunters are misdirecting that opening location, and the reason why is because the card newspaper reports, if it's drawn on turn 3 or if it's drawn and held by hunters, it will reveal your starting location one turn later than if you didn't misdirect. So it lets you keep your trail potentially hidden one turn longer. It also decreases the odds.
Not only one turn later, but also, if this is day 3, and hunters wrote newspaper reports, they can immediately reveal your that starting location without encounter. Right. But if you misdirected it, they cannot do this. So it basically delays not by 1 turn, but by 3 turns.
Yeah. So minimum of 1 turn.
And some of them pretty well sometimes.
Yeah. And then, of course, if hunters are searching locations with things like hired scouts or allies, 1 less city on the trail means potentially 1 less place for them to check. But newspaper reports is the most relevant card there. Now, there are sometimes benefits of not misdirecting that opening location, and I believe our very own WcKaczek is a fan usually of not doing that. So, do you want to explain maybe some of the benefits of not misdirecting?
Yeah, so I think the first important thing to say about not misdirecting is if you don't have idea why not to misdirect, then use misdirect. Just simply because your trail is that little bit more obscure, harder to find with newspapers and scout, right? And it doesn't have any useful encounter to mature. But there are two reasons why to not misdirect. One of the basic, three reasons. Okay. One reason is very basic. It is that you can learn that location and use it either as simple encounter economy improvement, because you can layer stuff and put encounters that you don't want on the layer, and have like one more trap, usually very minor. But also as a layer, you can go back there and have double encountered layer. And because of how the time works, you can go. I mean, you can go back there very, very fast. Usually, so early hunters are not really that well prepared to like jump you and murder you. So even if they know where it is, they may not be able to deal with you, and it is a little bit harder for them to deal with double encounter location. That's a little bit harder than with single encounter. And sometimes there is like a meta tricky thing. Let's say you know your opponent well because you play him on a regular basis. You know somehow like how they think. And yeah, like for example, you made a good point. If you want to start in Athens, which is usually very strong start for Dracula, this is why Valona and Athens are quite often scouted. But then, well, quite often when hunters see that, so when you go as Dracula into Athens, and then if you want to move away, you need to misdirect Valona. So sometimes what I do is I start in Athens as starting location without encounter and move to Valona, and then when I proceed moving, some hunters players think like, oh, so since he didn't use misdirect, he cannot be in Athens. So I'm not scouting Athens or Valona, right? And the very idea of starting in Valona instead and using misdirect as that, I mean, not misdirecting as that little bit trick, but it is, I mean, relying on the you can predict somewhat how hunters can think, right? So all of the three things are, I would say, quite big advance that you need to have some longer plan on some deeper idea what you're doing. And if not, you know what, just misdirect and be dealt with it.
That's a great way of putting it. I think if you are a newer Dracula player, you probably want to be misdirecting almost all the time, unless, of course, you're going to experiment with not doing it, seeing how you can make use of it. But the Dracula strategies that involve not misdirecting are usually something that you pull off when you're a more experienced player. So if you're new to this, I would recommend always just start by misdirecting, and you can, once you're a little bit more established, then feel free to experiment with it once you have a handle on things. Anything else on this topic, or do you want to move on to the common starting encounters?
I think we have so much stuff to talk that let's not
Yeah,
stay on the
we should
misdirect too long.
keep a pace going and not keep some momentum going and not linger. So, common starting encounters. Now, again, when we talk about Hunt or Dracula starts, we're usually talking about that second place that Dracula actually is, because that's where the first encounter goes. And because of that assumption that the first actual location may be misdirected, it's very often spoken of that the second place Dracula goes is actually considered the starting location. So it can get a bit confusing when people are sometimes not misdirecting now, but in general, when you hear players talk about a Dracula start, what they mean is that second location where the first encounter goes. So what maybe should that first
It's
encounter
also
be?
a key point.
Yeah.
I think that understanding that the starting location you actually meant right now, whereas the first encounter, is that it is a very game deciding location. It is very important because where you put it really can influence how high of a chance you have to mature it and
Yeah.
where you can go from there.
Yeah, it really
And
does
this,
shape the whole rest of the game in terms of what options you have from then on.
yeah.
So, the common starting encounters, I think what I have here is just kind of a list of what the common ones usually are, and we'll kind of go through each one briefly and then discuss some general ideas. So the most common ones are going to be cards that you would really, really like to mature. First one, if you can choose any card to mature in the game, maybe you pick a vampire with a room on it, but I really love to mature a hoax because that gives you a Dracula event card, which is a big deal. You usually don't get a Dracula card if you're, playing the average hunters. People don't night supply, and if you're gonna mature a hoax, it's so hard to mature them because they can't really protect themselves. Hoaxes, that if you're going to mature a hoax, the best odds of doing it are with your opening encounter. So if you can mature a hoax, that's amazing. That sets you up in a much better position as Dracula than you would have been otherwise. And yeah, it's just a great card to have. And even if it doesn't mature, you've still delayed the hunters or you've consumed a stake by making them spend that stake searching for the hoax. So always a solid choice. The next common starting encounters are vampires. Maybe it's a fighting vampire, maybe it's an aristocratic. Actually, it's more than anything, probably more common to play an aristocratic vampire in the first location because, Draculas often prefer to save those fighting vampires for later, especially if you're thinking that aristocratic vampire is going to mature. It's better to play the aristocratic because that one's not useful as a fighter or a damaging encounter. But really,
Yeah,
any
especially
vampire
that
is a solid choice.
sometimes, yeah, especially that quite often, like the basic play for picking a starting location is to pick it as far as hard to reach for hunters as possible. So even if it gets revealed, for example, by newspapers on day 6, so when the location is on fifth space, right, or even with some other means, then maybe they will not be even able to reach it. So then you don't need fighter vampires that can protect themselves.
That's right.
And yeah, so sometimes aristocratic and hoaxes are the top picks because they are so weak and measly and defenseless. So usually the weak one is where hunters have the worst horse economy, have the least maybe not sorted events, maybe not sorted items fully. So this is like where they are in the biggest mess. So usually that first encounter is that you can have the best odds of maturing.
That's right. And actually, I should have probably put these in a different order. I would say the choices are hoax or aristocratic are kind of the optimal ones out of these to place first. Then maybe a reckless. Then maybe a new vampire. The new vampire gives you a little bit fewer points than the reckless or the aristocratic. So if you do manage to put a rumor and mature that, it's only going to be 6 points instead of 7, and that is a kind of a crucial point. Because of the way that Fury of Dracula works with giving you multiples of 3 points towards 13. But again, these hoaxes or vampires, that's the kind of most prototypical starting encounter. Now, actually, I didn't really. I should have added a copy of the Sagani bodyguards to this slide because that's
This is
another
true.
like nice one to mature. It's not it's not quite as powerful as it's definitely not as powerful as a hoax. Doesn't give you points like a vampire, but if you can mature Sagani bodyguards, that's a really sweet thing to have in your pocket for later. And so that's something that sometimes players will place in their first location, especially if they didn't draw an aristocratic or a hoax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bodyguards are, I myself like learn to value bodyguards more and more because they actually can serve dual purpose. One is obviously as the bodyguards. When you meet with hunters, you just trigger them to know the weapon, one weapon of a bodyguard usually, or of a hunter, and deal that 2 damage, which might matter.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's also a second use, is that hunters have quite a lot of ways to protect themselves from dying, especially later in the game. Lucy's revenge, great strength, escape routes, maybe lucky finds for Holy Circle, maybe plant ambush for some safer combat, maybe even heroic leap. So sometimes what you can do as Dracula, when hunters enter a night combat, maybe they're not prepared because Helsing didn't have time to trade, maybe they didn't have, maybe they are counting on those life-saving events like Great Strength and Lucy Revenge. And as Dracula, you just need to put them down low enough, even if they escape, to like 1 or 2 health when they're delayed. So you stay in place by feeding, hiding, dark calling, and then you trigger 2 damage with bodyguards for that last bit of damage that is unavoidable. And basically it is uninteractive for hunters. If you manage, or sometimes, even hunters are not prepared, like they're clearing trail, and they don't have in mind that they can be in danger, as long as they have some health, and mob hits them, maybe some events hits them, maybe even some vampire fights them before going down to stake, and then maybe you walk onto the hunter for their fight, or wolf onto them to just finish them off for the last tick of damage and just kill hunter. So they can be bodyguards and they can be assassins.
Yeah, and the nice thing about bodyguards too, if a hunter really does have that little health, great strength cannot. I don't think great strength can protect them from a bodyguard killing them, right?
No. Great strength protects only from damage from combat.
Yep. Yeah. So again, I really neglected bodyguards by not including them here. They are, I think, a really good card to mature. Again, overall, I would prefer maturing a hoax or a 7-point vampire, but maturing a bodyguard is really nice. So those are kind of the most common ones. The other cards that mature, the only other card that has like a really good mature effect is usually Desecrated Soil, but early in the game, Dracula tends not to need extra health, so that's not something that you would want to play so early. But the other thing about starting is, do you do the hide trick? And the hide trick consists of, placing your first encounter and then playing hide, so that you're essentially putting two encounters in the same space. And with the early game hide trick, what you're doing is protecting the main card that can actually mature with something that will help it mature. So the main cards that you're going to see used with the hide trick are your Saboteur, which is a great little card. It delays the hunter, so if a hunter moves in to try to disarm the Saboteur, if it's a location that's now one city, or a city that's now 1 day away from maturing, the Saboteur stops them from searching at night, and now they can't clear that encounter unless they move another hunter in, or unless they play Forewarned on the Saboteur. And actually, the great thing about the Saboteur is, it's a weaker card elsewhere, so, if you're going to do the hide trick, this is kind of the optimal one to use. And if the hunter comes in without a gun, the only way then for them to clear the encounter is to move another hunter in. But if the first hunter didn't have a pistol or rifle to kill the Saboteur, then the second hunter moving in won't do any good. So potentially you can delay 2 hunters, or prevent 2 hunters from disarming a opening encounter with the Saboteur if you're lucky. Bats is kind of the other choice. Generally, that's a much more powerful card than Saboteur, unless, of course, you're talking about that case where the first hunter does not have a gun, but the Bats does give a lot of extra delaying and movement, and it eats up a lot more hunter resources than the Saboteur does. Both of these will, again, prevent a hunter from clearing that location if it's on the last space of the trail, and if there's no other hunter nearby to come in and deal with the encounter. And
with Bats, actually, Bats protect even if it's second to last, because when there's only one hunter around, they are moved away during the night, and the next day they cannot move back in to clear it. Bats can protect an encounter from one hunter for 2 days.
Yeah, that's right. And so Bats, great card. They are very effective for that. And it's not that often, actually, that if you're starting in an extremity location, which we will be talking about locations soon, I promise, but if you're starting in an extremity, oftentimes 2 hunters are not going to be positioned to come in. So Bats is going to be pretty effective at delaying them and stopping them from dealing with that encounter. And of course, the last option is Unnatural Fog, that both delays the hunter and prevents them from searching as long as it's in place. So assuming you're starting in a port city, which most starting locations tend to be, this will be very effective at stopping hunters. It also, of course, stops any other hunters from moving in. The only downside of using Fog is that it's a very powerful card, and usually, not always, but usually I find it a bit of a waste to use it on a hide trick. Unless,
especially that when you count how it works, it is when you use it as a hide trick on week 1, it is somewhat glorified saboteur, because remember that fog tokens were off at the dawn. So no, not at the dawn, at the dusk. Right?
Dusk.
Yeah. So hunter cannot search the location for one night, then during the day because there's fog, but the next night it can search it. So it does protect from a hunter only for one night and one day.
Yeah. And again, usually it's a bit of a waste to use a fog that way because it's such a powerful game-changing card. It's like, Dracula's most powerful event. So it's a shame to use it up on just maturing. Even like maturing a hoax is a very powerful thing to have happen, but I feel like using a fog up that way is always a shame. So anyway, things to consider. With the hide trick, one thing to think about, there's two downsides to it. One is that it may give your location away. If Seward draws the card Wax Cylinders, he can use that at night to check for the card Hide. If Hide is on the trail, it's revealed, and so is the city that it's attached to. So you might end up finding, doing that hide trick, and then Seward immediately plays Wax Cylinders the next night, and boom, your extremity location is suddenly not so hard to get to because the hunters have time to get in position and get there. The other downside of the hide trick is it shortens your trail. So when you play hide, and this is the downside of hide in general, you're not moving another city, so hunters can essentially find 2 spaces of the trail in one move just by checking one city. And even if it is a little bit harder for them to clear that space, that's one less city away from them that you're moving, and it's just less time that they have to spend clearing up your trail. So I would think hard about using the hide trick. It can be good, but it's not always the best thing. Oftentimes it's better to keep moving. And the last thing about the opening encounters, sometimes you maybe don't want to play any of these cards. There is definitely a trend of players sometimes playing things like mobs, rats, wolves, bodyguards, and kind of maybe a chain of damaging encounters or a chain of delaying encounters like saboteurs, aristocratics, hoaxes, to kind of slow the hunters down a lot or just beat them up a lot and not play any vampires until a while later, and then you can kind of do a chain of vampires in a row. So that's definitely an approach that you can take too. Any comments
I
on
think
that?
it is when you have some experience and play against efficient hunters that know their stuff and were prepared week 1, and they know how to manage events, manage items, and set up and know weakness of their start, so they know where to scout and all of that. You realize that no matter what you do, in how obscure location in how distant location you start, or how obscure location you start, even if you use hide trick, most of the cases you don't mature the starting encounter anyway. So sometimes it may be the case that you put a lot of eggs in that maturing basket, and okay, it is inconvenient for hunters maybe to deal with it, but in most cases it is still doable. So there's also like a lot of ideas, but they need a little bit of creativity, planning, and sometimes again knowing your opponent. Maybe you don't start with aristocratic on first location. Maybe you start with saboteur. So when the hunters rush to stop it from maturing, they just get delayed. And the next location is aristocratic with bats. And suddenly, even 2 hunters, if they go in proper order during couple days, they will fail to clear it, even trying hard, right? Or something like that. Or maybe you just put a lot of irritating stuff and then start building lairs.
Yep. Yeah, so this is definitely not like the only things you can play. And again, as you gain more experience as Dracula, you'll probably want to start experimenting with some other approaches. But these are kind of the most common starting encounters that you'll see, and there's good reason for that. So
Yeah, there's a lot of room for creativity in that, to be honest.
Yeah, a lot of fun things to play with. So now we're finally going to get to the actual subject of this video. We're probably half an hour in at this point. Common starts by region. So what we're going to do is kind of go over some of the, again, common places that you'll see Draculas starting and go over why it is that Draculas tend to go there. These are usually going to be extremity locations, and we'll discuss what that means a little bit more as we get a view of the map in coming slides. But it's, of course, important to note that extremity is all relative to where the hunters start. That's why, again, it's important to understand where hunters usually tend to start, because everything is relative to where they are. If they start in some kind of unconventional setup, then everything that we say tends to go out the window, but usually they don't start in unconventional setups because the conventional ones are the best. And there are some non-extremity starts too. Nice to kind of know what you can do with some of those. But we will go over all of this in the coming video. The last thing, don't Dark Call. It's not a good card. And at the beginning of the game, there used to be, when I was kind of starting out, there used to be a little bit of the meta where people would start somewhere, play the card Dark Call, you lose 2 health, you get 5 cards, and it like obscures your trail a little bit longer in some way, but it's not a good card. It's a waste of health, it's a waste of resources, it doesn't extend your trail. Again, just remember your trail is one of your most powerful resources as Dracula, and every card that you play that doesn't extend your trail is really a gift to hunters. So if you're not going to be extending your trail, you want it to be for a good reason, like feeding when you need to, hiding when you need to, things like that. So don't Dark Carl, just don't do it.
Yeah.
And again, we discussed this before, but the start, when people talk about a Dracula start, what they mean is actually the second location where the first encounter is played. So just keep that in mind for terminology.
Yeah.
And so Amsterdam start means that you actually place Dracula in Brussels or Cologne, but then you move to Amsterdam, place that encounter. And again, see that earlier section of this video on misdirect and whether to misdirect or not. But finally, we are at the map, and it's time to talk geography and locations. I, again, mentioned that you should go and watch Scott Sword's video on all the standard starts, so I assume that you know this stuff. But we're just going to show here the 2 most common starts that are being used, the Scott Sword start and the superhero start. As you can see, they're both very similar. It's just who's in Vienna with Godalming. Is it Mina or is it Seward? The superhero start, as of this recording, has been getting a lot of popularity lately. I think it's growing in popularity, and I do think that's for good reason. I think it's a very good starting setup. But if you want more on that, go watch Scott Sword's video on this. So the main thing to know here is that these cities, Madrid, Vienna, London, these are kind of the key locations for determining what's an extremity location. And we're going to get into that as we go. But we're going to go region by region. I'm going to start in Britannica. What do you think of Britannica starts? Are you a fan?
Yes, I'm a big fan because of 2 things. One thing is when you start in Britannica, I believe that there's a good chance you will lose the game, but also there's a good chance that you will have a lot of fun.
Yes.
Britannica is a really weird, but also can be really fun. And, I think you will be able to see that despite it being very tight and very low number of spaces and very close to one hunter, you can actually make like 4, 5 different starts in this very region. Britannica usually counts on, you either start Ireland on the or the Ireland or the British island, and these are 2 completely different games. If you start in Ireland, you hope that you are so far away from hunters and it is so hard to reach for them because of the seas and all of that, that you have really good odds for maturing first encounter that you put down. So you can either start in Galway and move into Dublin, and then hope that Dublin matures, and then, for example, go to Galway, move to North Atlantic, and either move a little bit by sea or just land in the France, or you move, you start in Dublin and then move into Galway and put there your first encounter. You misdirect Dublin and then exit through Irish Sea, which I think is a little bit of trap, because if you go from Irish Sea, what are your directions? Either you go through North Atlantic, so exiting through Galway is basically strictly better. Because you just extended your sea move by one, or you land in England, but this can be inconvenient because you actually are entering England quite late into the game, and hunters can have, for example, consecrated ground at that time and simply push you out, which happened, funnily enough, against Scotford himself, like when you did a 4v1 some time ago against him. Or actually, by that time, hunters have some good number of events. They're ready to go, so it is maybe quite easy to protect Helsing. Stuart is already probably moving because maybe he will think on clearing the Ireland, and then exiting England can be very difficult. So I'd say if you start in Ireland, you very much hope to have a vampire and rumor it and protect it with hide, because you want to like maximize your odds for maturing. And
or better yet,
exit Ireland.
Better yet, maybe you have a hoax followed by a vampire with a hide, because then you can get both benefits. And honestly, that's probably the only thing that could make starting in Ireland worth it, because Ireland is objectively a bad place to start, but it can be fun, like you said.
In general, yes. Because the biggest issue with Ireland is that forces you to go to sea, and these do two things. One thing is that you lose health, and tell hunters that you are at sea. So if they have like surprising return, they draw scouting event or something, they can actually start thinking about Ireland. And it may help them, to find where you started and help them clear it. And if they have some events, if they start moving early enough, they might clear Ireland anyway, even despite the fact that you hope to mature it. And then you start damage. Then you have sea spaces in week 1 when you should have encounters that slow down hunters, and lots of very inconvenient stuff. I really don't like Ireland starts, and I really think they're not very good because they push you into sea too early, and early enough you are very strong as Dracula, and hunters are not that strong yet usually, so you shouldn't be that afraid of them. You should use that land advantage.
Yeah, and that kind of brings us to starting on the mainland, because one thing that people do like to do there as Dracula is, you start there, you're alone with Van Helsing, no other hunter can reach you easily, and you do have a chance to kind of set things up for a very nasty trail that Van Helsing then has to deal with without much backup. So typically people will start either in Swansea or Edinburgh, unless sometimes you do see Van Helsing start in Edinburgh, in which case you might start in Plymouth instead. Get a little bit longer trail. But those are the common ones. Again, I don't think this is like a bad start, but it's very risky, and if hunters do get good movement, or if they draw consecrated ground early, it can go really badly for you. So I think it's a high risk, potentially high reward. If you can kill Van Helsing and then mature some things, that can be very high reward, but be careful with it.
In the British Island, there, in my opinion, are two very distinct and completely different playable starts. One is that you start in Edinburgh, by which we mean that you put your starting encounter there, and you go through Manchester, you go to Liverpool, Swansea, you hide somewhere along the way, and then next day, probably I would hide in Liverpool most of the cases. So you hide in Liverpool, go to Swansea, and then the next day, if Helsing don't move to Edinburgh to clear it, you walk onto Helsing and just brawl with him. And the idea is, what is very important, England is very tight space. It is hard to move around for Dracula, especially in the digital edition, where first you have to choose moving location and then you slide your trail. So it is that much harder to go back into a place. So to make it work, if you just go through Edinburgh to Swansea and go to sea, this is not a very good and efficient start because Helsing may clear something, may not clear everything. Maybe something will mature, but then again, you're at sea, you're moving in you go through Irish Sea, in a very inconvenient space. Hunters can, on the mainland, can prepare for your landing, and sometimes it is very ugly and very nasty. So what is your objective? You need to force hunters to commit more hunters onto England, so your landing when you leave England will be easier. That's why you need to have a vampire somewhere around Manchester and Liverpool and hopefully mature it. So when you go through Swansea and London, you can go to Plymouth, then misdirect London, and then go back to Swansea because at that time one of the vampires matured and cleared the Swansea. So and London too, by the way. So you go through London, Swansea, and go back to Liverpool, and suddenly you can spend like almost 2 weeks on the very British island, and yeah, you both will save a lot of time. Helsing with only 8 health can't deal alone with this. Maybe someone will die, and magic can happen.
Yeah. But I think what we're getting there is that a lot of things have to go right for Dracula to make that work.
Yes.
So that's where
yes.
the high risk comes in.
Yeah. And sometimes it is like a 50-50, for example. Let's say if you get no vampires, then it is nasty because you have no way to make like the loop around back, right? If nothing matures.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can have hoaxes, soils and stuff. And this Helsing, he's along with his 3 items. Maybe he didn't draw Heavenly Host, so you have stuff to mature, right? Maybe he didn't draw stakes, so can't manage that. Sometimes hunters will move to clear the stuff, and they'll manage to do this, and they're like, okay, it was easy for them. It is easy to reach. So not the best start. So sometimes you can flip the script. Don't put maturing stuff, put the combat stuff, put spies, bodyguards, mobs, and suddenly Helsing with his low pool of health moves to clear expecting, aristocratics, maybe fighting vampires, but he has stake, maybe hoaxes, right? And he just gets battered with damage and is almost useless.
Yeah.
But maybe sometimes hunter get dogs. Maybe they get lots of weapons to counter your damaging encounters, or maybe they will just don't bother searching, and all that traps will go to waste.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
this is
Britannica,
flippy scenario.
Yeah. And so we've alluded to this already, but it can be quite difficult to leave Britannica because you have to go by sea, and the options that you have for coming out of the sea once you are in the sea from Britannica are pretty limited. It's quite easy for hunters to position themselves so that they can block or check all of your landing locations, even with wolf form. And so to really get to a place where you have a lot of locations to land from, you have to move at least 4 seas. You have to go, say, English Channel, North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Mediterranean. Then you can wolf form and have a lot of places. But by the time you've been at sea for 4 days and hunters already know that you came from Britain, they're going to be in position to, check all the main wolf form locations from the Mediterranean. So getting away from the Britannica by sea can be quite bad for Dracula too.
Yeah, going from the Mediterranean isn't really that good either because hunters can prepare, have Mina with someone else in Italy, and they scan. If you're not in Italy, you are kind of cornered yourself because you are far away from any sea.
Yeah.
And even if you are close, those seas are already on the trail, right? So you don't have any backup escape. You can be easily surrounded. So you really need that first week, 2 weeks in England to give you so massive advantage that the trip through the sea and landing, that is extremely difficult for Dracula. Because if you land from the sea without wolf form, there are usually not that many locations to check, and you can be easily found with renewed vigors or with CG pushing you back to sea. It is easy to die. But then if you use wolf form, you don't have wolf form for an entire week. And how do you want to survive? When hunters know that if they corner you, they can just squeeze you out, right?
Exactly. So yeah,
But
Britain. Well, the other thing about
there
Britain is
is,
that you can start in Britannica. Maybe you don't want to because of all the high risk that we've mentioned, but you definitely don't go to Britannica unless, I would say, except for in a very few specific cases. One would be that consecrated ground has already been
you know
played.
what?
Oh yeah.
Before we go to that scenario, I would say about one more way you can start
Oh sure,
in
yeah.
Britain. Actually, you can check my channel. I think I have 3 videos where I started in Britain, and each start was very distinct.
Okay.
So it is very fun. You can start in Swansea, go through Liverpool, Manchester, and Edinburgh, and then hide in Edinburgh, maybe Darkhold in Edinburgh, and then use Wolfram to London, and this is the perfect amount of time to go back and loop into Swansea and Liverpool again.
Yeah.
And you may be able to build some nasty lairs, and it is on quite isolated island, so it may be quite difficult for hunters to reach and to clear. Maybe you dealt yourself some damage, but maybe in Liverpool you use feed, especially if you build something like nasty 3 vampire lair, or maybe 2 vampires, fog and spy, or I don't know, any combination of the most nasty, most uh, like difficult stuff. And then if you live through sea, it is not necessarily that bad, even if you spend a little bit of time, because hunters are in that difficult spot. Do they commit hunters to Liverpool and Swansea to clear those lairs? If yes, you can basically land from North Atlantic and be safe. Maybe
Yeah.
not even use Wolfram.
Yeah, and
And
that actually applies to any sea movement. It's pretty bad for Dracula to be moving by sea, but if you can get the hunters really tied up and busy dealing with encounters and damaged and undersupplied, then that's kind of the one position where you can take advantage of moving by sea because then they have to choose between moving to catch you and resupplying or healing. So if you can pull that off, it can still be pretty effective.
yeah. So basically, this is also a really weird and costly start because you need to waste one day waiting for your lair to be able to re-enter. Use wolf form quite early, right? Because you need to wolf
Yeah.
form from Edinburgh to London and all of that. But when it works, I think I even used it a few times against you, and we had a game where I was sitting in Liverpool on 3 vampires, and you renewed vigor 3 hunters onto me, and all of them died, and I and then ended that day at full health, and I was like laughing Dracula.
Yeah, that's the optimal Dracula outcome. Really, anywhere you can get 3 vampires on top of you, that's a happy Dracula.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah. So again, basically, if you go to Britain, it should be either I think the very beginning of the game or the very end of the game because you don't want to go there unless consecrated ground has
Usually,
already been used or if you have devilish power. But even then, you still have to be careful because they can still kill you in like Manchester and or if it's like so late in the game that you only need 1 or 2 moves left to win by Fury of Dracula, or if hunters are extremely out of position and you have enough health to survive a consecrated ground nuke.
yeah.
But generally speaking, if you're going to Britain, it should be because you're starting there or you're about to finish the game there. So it's a bit of a. It looks appealing for Dracula at first glance, but it's not actually that good of a place for him to be in most cases. So
Yeah.
anything else there? Or
But
do we
basically,
move?
just because the sea movement is very punishing for Dracula
Yeah,
for
sea
many,
movement
many
and very
reasons.
constricted land movement as well.
Yeah, and especially that when we see what can you do in other starting locations as a comparison, then oh man, magic starts happening.
Yeah. So a couple other things I just noted here. If Van Helsing does start in Edinburgh, maybe you can start in Plymouth, get a little bit of a longer trail going. If Van Helsing starts in Manchester, that kind of makes the UK or the Britain starts even worse. I think. Again, you could do that thing where you walk onto him, beat him up some, but you don't usually see the Manchester start very much, so I wouldn't think too much about that. But I would probably err on the side of not going to Britannica in that case.
Yeah, especially that already Helsing made a little bit difficult life for himself,
Yeah.
not being in a port city. So yeah,
Yep. And I've also seen very occasionally I've seen him start in Liverpool, which then again you can start in Plymouth, Edinburgh, but that's just such an oddball start. You don't see that very often.
Yeah, and how often did you see a start when there are two Helsings
Oh, well,
in
that
club?
too. Yeah, that's that's a little bit of an editing problem here, but yeah. Two Van
Yeah, yeah,
Helsings, Hunter's OP.
yeah,
All right, so
yeah,
moving
yeah.
on. Oh, there we
Yeah,
go.
yeah. Oh, great.
Jesus, I put a lot of these slides. Okay. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah.
So the main thing that you want to do in Britain, the Edinburgh, Swansea, maybe Galway. Moving on, Gallia, France, and the Benelux region.
Ooh.
Now we're getting into some interesting territory where Dracula might actually have some good options. So the main start here is Nantes, and this is what we're going to refer to as a bit of an extremity location. It's not actually that extreme, but it has some of the properties of an extremity location.
It is quite extreme.
Yeah. Well, so
It
so
is.
yeah, the reason why Nantes is an extremity location is think about the hunter in Madrid. How quickly can they get to Nantes, assuming they have, fully functional horse economy? It takes them 1, 2, Santander, Bordeaux, Nantes. So that's 2 turns by horse to get there. And it's 2 turns by train. So they can get to Bordeaux by train, but then they still have to walk into Nantes, even if they have chartered carriage. The only thing that can get them there in 1 turn is a sense of emergency. And of course, Van Helsing is nowhere close. The other two are nowhere close. So
I
Nantes,
mean,
that's
Van
what we call
Helsing is
extremity.
close.
Yeah.
If Van Helsing is close, if he has excellent weather.
Right. Yeah. Of course, that's true. Excellent weather does make Nantes a little more accessible. But Nantes is kind of the one extremity location in France, and because of that, you do see a lot of Draculas starting there. Basically, going back to what we were talking about with those starting encounters, if there's something that you want to mature, putting it in a extreme location can be a better way to make that happen. If you're going to use the hide trick, protecting Nantes with a hide, with something delaying can help that, especially then if you go to Bordeaux. Because the hunter coming from Madrid has to go through Bordeaux to come to Nantes. So if you put something delaying in Bordeaux as well, and something delaying in Nantes, you've made pretty sure that they are not going to make it there to clear that encounter.
Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
you said this is the only extremity location in Gallia, but actually Clermont-Ferrand has all the same properties.
That's true. Actually, yeah. I haven't thought about the Claremont start, but it's true. It's not on a rail. It is 3 moves away from Madrid, and actually, it's even further from Van Helsing. Even if he does have an excellent weather. So yeah, that's one worth thinking about. Some other French starts
Yeah.
that you might do. Strasbourg. You sometimes see people doing Strasbourg, partly because again, it's far from all hunters. It's only 3 moves away from the 2 hunters in Vienna, so it's a little bit less extreme in that sense. And it is on rail, so chartered carriage can get hunters there fairly quickly. But it has the most connections of any city on the board, so there's a lot of road connections to check, and even more if you think about rail connections out of Strasbourg. So you put your starting encounter there. Hunters have a lot of places to check to try to find your trail after you leave Strasbourg.
Yeah. Especially like, for example, if you put a saboteur here and the hunter that is closer to that was searching is actually delayed and they have like many directions to check and that one more hunter less for one day, right?
Yeah, yeah. So thinking about that in terms of burning up the hunter's resources, it may not be the most remote location, but it does let you tie up a lot of their resources by searching.
In general, France is a location that its most prominent value for Dracula is its stealthness and number of connections. Even port cities, which usually are very limited, are quite stealthy in the sense that can have quite a number of connections. Not on a rail, so like stealth game is really good in France.
Yeah.
My biggest issue is that whenever you start, it's not only that about the starting location, but also what I mentioned is where you go next. So
Yeah.
usually when you start in France, you spend your future turns, second, third week, probably away from France because you just dragged some hunters here to clear your trail, and I think this is a little bit of downside in starting in Gallia. It is hard to go back to Gallia later, and in later games when hunters are super powerful, that's where you need stealth the most, that you need that opportunity that the hunters are not sure about your next connections or even your directions because of the numbers of trails. So I really love to be in Gallia in later turns to end up there in the end game where hunters are, lost in the number of connections.
Yeah.
And starting in Gallia a little bit takes that away from you.
Yeah, a little bit. One thing about starting in Gallia also is that you can move in a lot of directions from there. You kind of have both sides of the board to choose from, but I would just be very cautious of the temptation of going to Spain from France, because Spain is a little bit of a trap. When you move into it, you almost always know that you're gonna have to move away from it by sea, and for all the reasons that we talked about with Iberia, with Britannica, leaving by sea from Iberia is usually not an ideal position for Dracula. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about starting Nantes and heading down towards France. Like, you have to be ready for that sea exit, and that can be a compromised position for Dracula.
Yeah.
But yeah, next up, that brings us to Iberia, Spain, Portugal. So because there's almost always a hunter in Madrid, sometimes they're in Bordeaux, but usually they're in Madrid. Madrid touches every city in Spain except for Barcelona, and so a local rumors or an evil presence can really blow up your spot if you're Dracula and if you're trying to be stealthy by starting in Spain. Because of that, the most common starting location that
Also,
you
the downside
see...
is that you're starting next to hunters, so it is, if they will know where you are, it is extremely easy for them to clear your trail.
Right. Yep. Yeah, especially a local rumors can reveal your entire trail in one turn. Let's say you start in Alicante,
Yeah.
you move to Granada, Cadiz, Lisbon, and then local rumors gets drawn, and now they know your entire trail, so they no longer have to spend any time searching for that trail. So because of that, Barcelona is by far the most. If people are going to start in Spain, Barcelona is the most common Spain start because it's at least 2 cities away from any hunter. It's only really close to the Madrid hunter, and especially if that's Mina. She's a bit of a weaker hunter. She's not as strong as Godalming and Seward. So she, you're maybe not as afraid of starting close to her. And then the 2 over in Vienna are a bit further away, especially if they're moving by horse and not by train. So you do see some Barcelona starts. It's also not checked by scouts that often. So it can be a little bit of a stealthy start.
Yeah, but the biggest downside is that it is easily reachable by horse, very easy to reach by rail. So if day 5 newspaper, I mean it is day 6, but like hide out on 5 location newspapers reveal it, that the hunter from Madrid, it is next to impossible for them to not reach Barcelona.
Yeah.
Right. And then even if you use some fog or saboteur, it doesn't delay them enough for be able to alone clear Barcelona. Only bats. But you start picking location without knowing if you have bats in your hand, so that would be a big risk.
Yeah.
And then again, where do you move out of Barcelona?
Yeah.
Not only your starting location is fairly easy to reach, but also your next locations are quite transparent. If you go to, I mean, most probably you go to Toulouse, right? It is fairly obvious. If you want to say, I will not be obvious, I will go to Saragossa, then probably half of the games will be revealed by one of the 4 events, local rumors, or evil presence anyway, right?
Yeah.
And it'll be, right, okay, I wanted it to be tricky and it didn't matter in the end. So the Barcelona start is not obscure in the sense that your trade is not obscure, it is not distant, so it doesn't have, in my opinion, it doesn't really have that many advantages.
Yeah.
Especially that, where do you go even from Toulouse? Do you go back to Spain? But again, you risk by in the first week when you make the loop, you can still be revealed by those proximity. Or do you go towards other hunters like in Vienna and Helsinki, making yourself easier to catch?
Yeah, so again, not really an optimal starting location, but it can be fun. Now, actually, one one comment about Spain too is that 2 of the most important cities in Spain are actually Bordeaux and Toulouse. which are not in Spain, because they are the two kind of gateway cities into Spain. So when you're Dracula, you have to be very aware of the importance of those cities, both for your trail possibly being discovered, but also for placing encounters on those trails, whether it's in a hideout or on a lair that can sabotage hunters when they're having to check or move through those locations. So just worth remembering. And actually, one other thing I was going to comment about is that I had an early experience when I was still fairly new to the game. I was playing against the player Spencer Wolfhart, who has been in a number of tournaments. He's been around for a while. And this was my first encounter with the lair strategy, where he kind of ran a big ring around Spain. I had Mina in Madrid, and she got the crap kicked out of her by lairs, and I just lost horribly, and I had no idea what hit me. So as a major proponent of the lair strategy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it is fun, but Spain is very limited to lairs because of consecrated ground and because it is easily connected and easily hunters can do assault into there. So if you do the lair strategy, you can do some rings for a few days, and then you need to pay attention to risk and bolt away, through the sea. It can be fun, but one local rumors or actually evil presence, and other hunters can start closing in, and even local rumors reveal all your lairs, so hunters have 100% knowledge where you are for the next week or even longer.
Yeah. So again, Spain, really not an ideal place to start. I would probably avoid it unless you're doing something experimental and want to try to develop an interesting approach. But for a new player, I would say don't start in Spain, safest that way, and leave Spain for more the end of the game, something that you want to move into to escape. Maybe you're wolf forming in from the Mediterranean after escaping from the east, or just running west in general. But Spain, I would say, is more for the end of the game than the beginning. So next up is Germania. And as you can see,
that's a weird order for me.
Oh,
I
well,
hope we'll go Italy now, but
kind of starting top left, going.
yeah.
But though, actually, I already have the arrow showing there, and the most popular German start is not in Germany; it's Amsterdam. Why Amsterdam? Because that is a prototypical extremity location. See how far it is away from Vienna? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 horse moves, meaning it's 3 turns of movement away by horse. It is by rail. It's going to be
for who?
Oh, for the Vienna hunters. Sorry.
For Vienna, one move is Munich. Nuremberg?
Right.
Nuremberg. Actually, 3 days. Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. No, it's 5 moves away. 5 road moves away from Vienna. Basically, it's also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 road moves away from Madrid. By train, it's a little bit easier to get to. They can go Berlin in 1 turn, Cologne in 1 turn. Oh, no, it's actually not. But a chartered carriage can get them, in position a little bit faster. But it's one of the, outside of the East and Bari, it's one of the hardest locations to reach. And so that's makes it a very popular spot for starting out there, doing a hide trick with a bats or whatever, and getting a hoax or a vampire to try to mature.
When you consider that, okay, let's say this location is revealed by when it is on location 5 by newspapers, and let's say you used hide delay, how much and how many resources, how many hunters need? Wait, once more time. How much resources, how many hunters need to spend to actually reach that and clear it?
Yeah.
So when you see, you basically don't have time to move by horses. You need to use an event, and maybe even 2 events, because if there's hide, 1 hunter may be not enough, right? So suddenly it becomes very expensive for hunters to reach it, and this is, I think, where you start seeing, Barcelona, you can use almost any rail ticket or even 1 horse move. Okay, not, but 2 horse move or 1 sense of emergency. Even there's the backup of Helsinki, right, with excellent weather. And when you check Amsterdam, oh my, day 5 newspaper is too late.
That's exactly
basically
right.
Need to scout it.
That's kind of the way with these extreme locations. Yeah, if it doesn't get found until that day 5 newspapers, hunters have a really hard time finding it. And yeah, so it's one of the best and most reliable ways to mature something. Now, of course, you don't know in digital edition. You don't know if you're going to have a hoax in your hand. If we did know that, like I think we would see a lot more Amsterdam starts and extremity location starts, because if you know you have a hoax and a bats in your hand, why not go to Amsterdam?
Yeah, I think we will be able to see all of the starts more often then.
Yeah.
Wait, no,
Or
that doesn't make sense.
wait, or all of the
We have
extremity location starts. Maybe I don't know. Maybe not. I think they're still
okay,
best
I don't
either
know.
way. But anyway, one thing that Van Helsing does sometimes do, you sometimes see him starting in Edinburgh, and that's a bit of a counter to Amsterdam, because then he's one excellent weather move away from Amsterdam, or two sea moves. So it kind of positions him a little bit better to deal with Amsterdam or possibly Hamburg. You don't see that too often, but one thing to consider.
I think, yeah, because it puts him away from like other continent. But I think Edinburgh start for Helsinki like can be little bit slight of improvement
Over
of
London.
the hunter starting setup.
Yeah, maybe. I haven't actually experimented with that one very much, but I should. So yeah,
And
Germany. Well, the other popular. Go ahead.
well, wait a second, because with the Amsterdam, or do we go? Yeah, okay. So we go from specific example of Amsterdam through into the general concepts, and then go back into specifics again, because Amsterdam has the big advantage of other locations that we're talking about, that hunters have no idea which direction are you moving. You can go through Brussels, Le Havre, maybe set up some trap for Helsinki when he'll be landing.
Yeah.
Or maybe go from Brussels to Gallia and use the connections there, and when hunters are looking for you, maybe searching where you went, maybe then you sneak into Spain. Or maybe no, maybe you go through Germania, maybe you go to the east, maybe you go down to the Italy. Like the Germany start has basically the most directions you can go. You can basically watch hunters' events. You can how they go, how the revealing of your tray works for them. Maybe you can watch some discards or shown items, and really decide on that which direction you want to go. It is actually quite powerful that you can stall a little bit, go through obscure locations, and then decide on your direction of movement depending on the hunter behavior at the end of week 1.
Yeah. Yeah, gives you a lot more flexibility than any of the places that we've talked about so far.
Yeah, that's why I also like Hamburg.
Oh yeah, here we go. Hamburg.
Oh yeah, or Frankfurt. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, Frankfurt is a bit of a
is
different. That's kind of a different. It's not really so much of an extremity. It's just kind of a fun. It's a bit similar to
It's little
Strasbourg.
bit. I think like Frankfurt and Hamburg still work because they're more than one horse move away.
Yeah.
So they are like little bit of an extreme. So because Amsterdam is so powerful, it is scouted constantly. That's why when sometimes you can say, you know what, that flexibility of Germania, that you can pick direction like anywhere, we can keep that and start like in Hamburg or Frankfurt.
Yeah.
And we have the flexibility, we have little bit of extremity. If we don't get hit, actually, if we don't get hit by newspapers, Hamburg is very rarely scouted, usually because it is not that extreme. And suddenly you can get a mature off, when sometimes you wouldn't mature Amsterdam, right?
Yeah. And yeah, a lot of the same things that apply to Strasbourg also apply to Frankfurt. So that's the other one. Beyond that, I wouldn't really say people start in any of the other German cities. They're just not
that really.
So.
In my opinion, actually, like in general, Germania starts are either second best or like as the starting region, it is like second best or even just within top 2 best, because of the flexibility and especially that again with the open map and directions, who will clear Hamburg or Amsterdam? This would be 1 or even 2 hunters from Vienna. And when you move those hunters up, how open suddenly map looks like, right?
Yeah.
When you start in Nantes, for example, those closing in hunters from Vienna can really like box you and
Yeah.
attack you from any direction. One goes into Munich, one you don't even know which direction will they go, through Strasbourg, through Genoa, and suddenly you're like in the middle of all hunters, and sometimes you can die week too. But with Germania, when hunters are dragged in that location, and you can pick basically three directions and keep moving away, yeah, that is very strong value.
Yeah, and that's actually another good point about extremity locations is that another function that they have, just besides being hard to get to, is that they also pull hunters towards them. So then the hunters then have to spend more time getting back out of the extremity into the map to chase your trail. So they keep giving a little bit after they've fallen off the trail. So yeah, that's Germania. I think we say ciao to Italia. So
Oh,
Italy.
aloha.
Aloha. No, that's Fury of who would be in the Pacific? Fury of Godzilla? I don't know. That's a different game.
Yeah,
So,
really? Okay,
yeah,
maybe. Okay, so do you like pasta?
yeah.
Basically, do you like
Do you
pasta?
like
Do
pasta? Do
you
you
like
like
wine?
espresso?
Do
Yeah,
you
fine
like
wines.
crazy drivers that?
Oh yeah.
Y- oh my!
Finely
Don't even
tailored
start with that.
suits and leather boots and yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Gabagool.
yeah.
Okay, so first thing to say about Italy, don't start in Cagliari. Don't do it. It's bad. Now, next most popular
So,
starting.
so, we need to send that clip, especially to Strider. Don't start with Cagliari.
He might still do it. Um,
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
so yeah, the next most yeah, one of the most extreme locations actually on the board is Bari, and for that reason, it is one of the most commonly checked with hired scouts. But think about it; it is very far away from any other spot on the board. Vienna by rail is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, by combination of rail and road, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 moves away. So that's just as far as Amsterdam, even accounting for rails. By road, it's even farther. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's a very extreme location, and that's
Okay.
why it gets checked so much. It also,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, I was
it
just
is
gonna say
very hard to reach
Naples and Bari. Yeah.
if you don't have excellent weather.
Mm-hmm.
You to reach Bari is even more difficult than to reach Amsterdam.
Yeah. Yeah, and that all just does depend on the hunters, not scouting it. If newspaper reports reveals it on day 5, hunters have very low chances
Yeah,
of getting there, but there's a very good chance that they reveal it before then because of that exact reason. Naples is
yeah,
another place that you can start, and one thing that I have seen done, and I've done myself, is you don't go to Bari at all. You start in Rome, you go to Naples for your first
exactly.
encounter, then you go back to Rome, Florence, and move out. That way, you might avoid the hired scouts that are, checking Bari and Valona or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of hunters like they scout Bari, so for the extremity location, and you move to Naples, that is like the tiny little bit closer, but not really. When you realize that Naples is harder to reach because of the excellent weather, sometimes Naples is even further than Bari, depending. Distance works weird in this game. So,
Yeah,
yeah, but lots of hunters realize that, and quite often when there are scouts in a little bit of the later day, like day 4, day 3, maybe, something like that, they scout Rome instead to
yeah,
just check if you started somewhere like south there, right?
exactly.
And
Because yeah,
that's
checking Rome on the day 3 or 4 pretty much checks all of Italy, and then you can use your other
more or
scout to
less.
check some other city, check Valona or check Amsterdam or whatever, and kind of kill two birds with one stone there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
And but still Italy. So Italy is, I would say, high risk, but potentially high reward. Almost, if you don't die,
If you don't
then
die.
Italy is almost always good. But let's continue that thought further. I mean, let's talk about you dying a little bit further, okay? Wait for
Yeah.
that. Uh,
Well, that's the thing. Is
uh,
Italy is great to start in,
it-
hard to get out of. And
yes, hard
yeah.
to get in, hard to get out. And the thing is that, in my opinion, it is the high risk, high reward, but a viable start instead of the Britain. Let's say like competitive. If you're playing tournament and you
Right.
want to do something risky, Brittany too risky, but Italy.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about? If you get revealed early by the pesky scouts that check those extremity locations, or by day 3 newspapers, you can be very toast if hunters get like good enough items and events. They don't even need to be that great. They can easily block you through Genoa and Venice, and then what? Do your wolf form? They can even like run you down when you don't have wolf on there and ignore your trail, right? Or they can even assault you when you are in Genoa and Venice. They can just attack you there. And I think the Italia starts have probably the highest percentage of Dracula deaths in first 2 weeks
I would love to
because of
see the
that.
statistics on that, but yeah, I could believe that for sure.
Yeah. But if you survive the exit because they didn't reveal you early enough, or they didn't find you, or they didn't win the fight, or something like that, then you either are maturing stuff, or they need to commit one or even two hunters there, and then all the map is open, so you can go whenever. Just, do you want to
Yeah.
go to Germany? Do you want to go to East? You just pick and choose. You are free as a bird.
Yep. Free as a
There
bird.
is very fun direction, and I think Italy has very distinctive advantage over any other start, is that you can have very specific direction that if hunters don't expect, you can really abuse it. And basically, if you succeed on that trail, you can almost like have really big advantage of winning the game. But since I will be talking about this, this will not be that surprising. So when you start in Italy, you go through Genoa, Marsilis, then work into Spain. How you do this? There are ways you can wolf form into it. You can use walk the usual, then misdirect. Maybe something. There are ways. If you succeed, you spend time in Spain, exit through Spain, so that you can land in Marseilles, that is Lair. And if you are able to Lair Marseilles with a fog and then land with a fog for double fogged Marseilles, you can go back into Italy. Don't forget to wolf from over Florence, please. But you don't even need to like go back into the boot. You can just go through the Genoa or Milan to Munich or Venice or something like that. And when you achieve this very specific trail, very specific goal, first of all, after you landing in Marseilles, it is already extremely late, and you bought ton of time. And Marseilles, when you fog it or even double fog it, is such a key connection that it takes ton of time for hunters to move around. If they try to assault you there, you have double fog, you are most certainly safe. The assault stops dead in the tracks, right? If they don't assault you there, it is very hard for them to chase you. And you landed from the sea without wolf form. Congratulations.
Yep.
And Marseilles is very unique location because this is the only location that if hunters have CG and know that you're in this port city, landed into this port city, you don't lose the game like almost immediately,
Yeah.
because
Yeah, as you were saying,
it
most
is
port cities have few connections, and Marseille is one of the few that it's got what, like five? So yeah, one of the few places that you can survive a CG bomb, even if your
one,
location
two,
is known.
three, four, five, six.
Six,
Yeah,
really? Wait,
and
one,
remember,
two, three. Yeah. Wow, six. Yeah, actually, as many as
and
Strasbourg,
s- and staying in Marseilles
but no, not as
is
much.
viable option if they CG just around you,
Yeah.
because you're on two fogs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You
you can
hide, you
just feed in
feed,
place, outwait.
And if it's late game, yeah, you can eat up a lot of clock just by hanging out underneath your fog. So yeah, that's Italy. Usually you're going to start in Bari, might be Naples. I think I have seen people start in Geneva. It's again a bit similar to like your Clermont-Ferrand or Frankfurt,
Yeah,
Strasbourg. I don't think it's top tier
yeah.
start, but you can do it.
I really like it actually.
Yeah.
I used to start it a lot because again it has the, let's say, the France quality of many connections, small city. It is actually hard to reach for everyone on the map.
That's fair.
You basically need one good horse roll or an event. So if you start and hide in Geneva, it it can mature right in the middle. And
Yeah.
to be honest, no one ever scouts Geneva.
That's true. Although a bit later in the game, they might, if they're drawing a scout on turn 4 or 5 or something. But yeah, usually it's not
Yeah.
a heavily scouted location. That's for sure. So yeah, that is
Yeah.
Italy. Okay, so we're resuming here after our technical difficulties with the next region up, which is Austro-Hungaria. Now, this is one where obviously you do not see a lot of Draculas starting here because he's so close to hunters, and it's very cozy and intimate. But you know, most typically that's not what Dracula wants to do. Now, if you do get a Dracula starting here, typically it's going to be that he's maybe in Klausenberg, which is not the worst thing in the world. But I don't know. Have you seen any other Austro-Hungaria starts to speak of?
I think all the three cities to the east, Klausenburg, Belgrade, and Sarajevo, can be desert, but not as a first location with the encounter. But the first location where you start, you literally the first one you pick without the encounter, because it is actually almost never scouted with scouts.
Yeah.
And also it gives you like open entry into the east, and your first encounter and second encounter can be not really that easy to find if hunters will use the newspaper, especially that because Sofia and Bucharest have a lot of connections. If you enter one of those, where did you exit, right? And also there can be decent lair connections. So it can be your first lair, that first lair when you return to after a week. Hunters are not congregated yet. Klausenberg and Sarajevo, both not on a rail, so like charted carriage can't catch you, right? Sarajevo a little bit of dangerous because it is very easy to CGU there. But again, if we're talking Monday, week one,
Yeah. Well,
it
yeah.
is
You're
not
not going to get
deadly.
CG'd. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not gonna die, and even if you will get CG'd, you can still maybe wolf from away. You can salvage this and maybe early enough to survive CG. And hey, hunters with CG, and you survived,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. But yeah, very rarely do you see people using those as a first encounter. I have, I guess, seen Klausenberg as a first encounter. Then usually they'll go to Galatz, but overall, just the proximity to the double hunter setup means that
Yeah, it is. It is too easy to reach to put first encounter. In a sense, like, why would you put first encounter there when you can put it further away and it costs hunters more simply to reach, right?
And also part of what the other factor that we didn't mention is that assuming assuming you're doing Scott Sword Start, which is the one shown here, if Mina is in Vienna, then you know, she may scan, and then if you are in Austro-Hungaria, you can just get detected immediately, and then the hunters have a head start on knowing where you are. But that's, you know, that's just another reason on top of the I think the reasons that we discussed earlier are the more relevant ones, actually.
Yeah, Mina rarely scans during first few days because that like solving that tickets is so important for hunters, right? Like there's bigger difference between having horses set up for week one, for week two, during week one for week two, than scanning Dracula within first few days.
And especially because Dracula never starts there, there's nothing to be learned really. So
yeah. Usually it gives nothing, and that ticket, that one ticket earlier, you know?
Yeah, the tickets are much more important. Okay, so much for Austro-Hungaria. I think we can move on to the Baltics. No, what's this?
Oh,
Why is Dracula up here? Oh, well, that's because for reasons that have yet to become clear to me, the eastern region of the board is called Baltica. I don't know why, because the Baltic Sea famously is up north by Finland and Latvia and Estonia and all those. I
and
even Googled it
Poland,
once.
sorry.
Yeah, I even Googled it
You
once.
missed the country.
No, to see like is Eastern Europe called Baltica? Like are the Balkans called Baltica? Like is the Ottoman Empire called Baltica? I couldn't find anything. So it's an utter mystery to me why this region is called Baltica. Go figure. If anybody can find that out, you get a prize. But yeah, Dracula being all the way up there, he's not going to find a lot of hunters. So you know he wants to be down here.
He's chilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, very very illegal for him to start up there. So in Baltica, there's I think the single most objectively, if your goal is to mature a starting encounter, I think the objectively best location on the board for that is probably Athens. Outside of maybe Galway or Dublin, is probably Athens.
I started of Amsterdam.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think Dublin, maybe I would say okay, I would say probably Dublin, Amsterdam, Athens, something like that. These are the three
The most likely to mature an
too
encounter?
mature for Dracula.
Even more
Yes,
than Athens. Why do you think that is?
Athens.
Yeah.
First of all, there is no rail pathway to Athens. I mean, you can argue that, okay, I can go, down to Sofia, but you need to move 3 times by the rail or use an event and move by the rail. So, like, no, not really. uh, so, rails don't help you. Uh, the excellent weather also doesn't help you. You basically need horses or sense of emergency. These are your only tools, and horses are rarely reliable. Week one
Mm-hmm.
and week two, uh, early week two, right? So, and sense of emergency, there are only 2 copies of that again. So maybe you will not even have that. And even if you do, sometimes one hunter is not enough to stop mature effect, especially if you hide,
Yeah.
simply because,
If Dracula's
yeah,
hiding, then that means both hunters have to get in, and sometimes, in some cases, with the saboteur, maybe even 2 hunters isn't enough.
yeah,
But
yeah. But
well, what I
again,
was saying
if
about
your
Athens
house
though
is,
is that so it's harder to reach. I thought Athens is harder to reach than Amsterdam because a chartered carriage can get you to Amsterdam, but it can't get you to Athens.
yes,
Assuming
yes,
that
and
newspaper
also
reports
excellent weather.
finds the thing, when it's on the fifth space of the trail.
Yeah.
Amsterdam can be reached with chartered carriage. Athens cannot.
Yeah, but also excellent weather for Helsinki too.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are more ways to reach Amsterdam. Actually, sense of emergency is a little bit less useful in reaching Amsterdam, unless you go like, Seward goes to Paris and then sense of emergency.
Sure. Yeah. But anyway, point is, Athens is by far one of the most easy places to mature an encounter if you're Dracula. So, and this is where our notes on the new beta version come into play. This is the kind of place that you are going to be very tempted to go if you're Dracula when you open up your hand and see, oh, I have a hoax and I have a saboteur or a hoax of the bats. Suddenly, Athens becomes a lot more enticing. Whereas maybe if you open up that hand and you just see a bunch of wolves and a mob and a bodyguard, maybe you say, okay, well, I'll start in a less extreme location. There's no, not that starting honestly starting in an extremity location is almost always a good choice for Dracula.
Yeah.
But it's the most powerful when you know that you have something like a hoax or a
War
a
of
vampire.
maturing.
Yeah, and
But
then a way
also,
to protect it.
when I was playing for the about first half year, when I was playing with a lot with the so-called old guard, it was well practiced and known. If you don't have, if you get a scout, like literally first scouts go to Valona or Athens, because it was scouted so much that Dracula basically never started there, but hunters got so much PTSD from that they're like, nope, we We don't want any of that because basically revealing Athens with the reveal hideout on the fifth space of trail uh, is usually too late. I would say most often than not, especially if you hide, then
Yeah, if you
you
hide
need
and they don't
to,
reveal it until turn 5, then yeah, it's damn near
yeah,
impossible. But even if you didn't hide, it can still be tough. Like you were saying, like a chartered carriage won't really
yeah,
get you there. You need
yeah,
the fast horses to come through, which is not always the most
yeah,
likely early in the game because your ticket economy may not be set up yet.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, so
yeah,
that's Athens. Great place to go if you've got a hoax for sure. Other locations in the east. Oops. Other locations in the east that are popular are Constanta and Varna, for really a lot of the same reasons. They
yeah,
have the advantage that they once you start there, your movement coming out of them is less constricted and less telegraphed. But they're a
and
little
they're
bit easier
scouted by
for
scouts.
yeah, they're a little bit easier for hunters to reach. So Constanta they can get to in one turn with a chartered carriage.
Yeah,
Varna they
so
can get to
Varna
in
can be a
two.
little bit better
Yeah, so Varna's probably a
sometimes.
little bit better. You also see Galatz used. Also, again, kind of reachable just like Constanta is, but it may be checked a little bit less often, something like that.
Yeah, and also it is a small city, so if
Mm-hmm.
hunters will use something like a stake,
Mm-hmm.
they are a little bit less prepared for what's next,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Or a spy,
Uh,
then yeah, same thing.
yeah. So sometimes Dracula, goes Galatz, Klausenberg, and then maybe, or sometimes Wolfhorn from Galatz, Klausenberg, Belgrade, and like avoid those big cities. So if hunters want to resupply, they
Mm-hmm.
simply need to waste a move,
Yeah.
right? Also, Salonika is really good.
Yeah.
Salonika is not noted here, but it is as far as Varna, but
Yeah.
it is a small city.
Yeah. Honestly, Salonika may be even a better excuse me, starting location than Varna because it does give you a few more options than
Mm.
Varna does of directions to move in once you leave it.
Yeah,
And it's interesting. I haven't seen Salonika. I really haven't. That's why I didn't note it as one of the ones on the slide here. I really have not seen a lot of people starting in Salonika, even though you would think that they would, because it is objectively a good spot to start in. So that's interesting that
yeah.
for some reason that one hasn't caught on.
Yeah, I was surprised when I realized this myself. I just started, using Salonika more often, and I realized this basically no downside.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Maybe the only downside is that if you leave Salonika, you need to go through Valona and Sofia, and when hunters scout east,
Mm,
they almost always scout one of those.
yeah,
And
yeah.
with Varna, technically, you can go, Varna, Constanta, Bucharest, and like
Hmm.
avoid a little bit of scouting.
That's true. That's true. It's a little bit more likely to get picked up by the scouts.
Yeah.
But yeah, so again, I think let me just see what slide is next. I don't. Oh yeah, God, that's pointed out. Um,
Yeah.
so
Wait a
I think
second,
just in
because
general, yeah, obviously you're a big fan of the East. You think it's the strongest region to
yes,
start. I mean, I would agree for sure. I think honestly, when I'm
is
not starting in the East, it's usually because I'm like, oh, let's mix it up. I want to do something different, something fun. Not always
yeah.
play the strongest possible. But at the same time, if every Dracula always starts in the East, then that would change the meta to the point where suddenly it wouldn't be quite as strong because it's expected. So I don't know. Yeah,
I
give us your thoughts on
think
the East. I know you can write a dissertation on this, but if you can keep it to the abstract here, that would be the ideal.
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, in my opinion, the strength of the East is that even if it's expected, it doesn't lose its strength.
Yeah.
So even if everyone will always start in the East, hunters, the very expectation of that wouldn't change much. They would simply need to reposition hunters. That's why I personally swapped Mina with Seward because I realized, you know what? Godalming with Mina is not good enough to stop Dracula,
Yeah.
and hold him. And why Pizza Wizard and some other hunters moved Seward to Bordeaux just to keep him a little bit closer to the east.
Yeah.
I think this is one of the reasons because basically when we talk about Dracula possible strengths, like okay, pirate Dracula, sneaky Dracula, efficient Dracula, engineer with the trail, or like fighty Dracula with assassination or fighting. where you don't want to go to sea early, as we noted, and you don't have a reason to do that. But when hunters are close, you have that exit ports, and you have a lot of them. It is quite easy to break away from hunters and go, and run away from them. If you go to Adriatic Sea, you can just move from to Genoa, and if hunters are searching for you east, this is like two moves, and you're suddenly far away, right? Or
And also, just for
obviously,
context, you were referring there to your kind of Dracula types, and that's a YouTube video that you did on your own channel. So I'll tag you in the description for this video so people can find your Dracula. What's it called? Like Dracula types or Dracula?
yeah, like Dracula classes, I think I
Classes,
said,
yeah,
because
yeah.
I follow the usual, RPG trope
Right.
here,
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
or
Dracula
the gaming
classes.
trope. Yeah, and what? So basically, this, in my opinion, this is very important for me, to unlock a full Fury of Dracula, is to realize that Dracula early is strong and hunters are weak. So Dracula doesn't need to run away from hunters or hide from them. He can abuse his strength.
Yeah.
And East's biggest weakness is that it is quite tight and confined. The directions are fairly clear, so you are not sneaky. But you don't need to be sneaky.
Yeah.
On
Yeah.
the other hand,
That's week one.
the tightness of this space helps you building lairs and helps you trapping hunters. Actually, the fact that there are few cities that hunters move through to stop your matures makes their move predictable, so that you can set traps for them, like much easier than in other regions. Uh, Also, that you are only 2v1, so hunters for a lot of days, when Seward or Mina starts in Munich, they basically need 1, 2, 3, about 4 days, over half of a week, to even enter the east, without using, without using
Yeah.
Renewed Vigor,
Carriage,
let's say,
emergency, or new
or
vigor.
maybe
Yeah.
Charted Card.
Yeah.
Yeah, and some weird stuff like that. But then, yeah, they expanded resources, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It gives you a
So
lot of time alone with whichever hunters started in Vienna. It gives you a lot of time alone with them, and it's like you said. I think the
yeah,
East stays strong even if hunters kind of prepare for it, because one of the starts that Scott Sword discusses in his hunter starts video, which I didn't bother to cover it here because I don't think it's actually an effective start. Is called the anti-East start, where maybe Godalming starts in Budapest and Mina starts in Bucharest or something like that. And the idea being that they can still reach each other to scan or to trade by one rail move, but they're separate so that it kind of covers more locations. But really, like, I think that's actually worse because Godalming really needs to be with another hunter, otherwise he's going to be throwing away good items.
yeah,
And like you just
yeah.
you want to have two hunters together, and Godalming be one of the hunters that's with another hunter, and like so that
And
just even the
especially,
attempt for hunters to
yeah,
disarm Dracula by blocking cities, like it just doesn't work very well.
yeah, and especially that one hunter is not a threat, especially early for Dracula.
Yeah, yeah.
And it can maybe, it is easier to scan, but how do you deal with that? Especially that, again, East is almost almost the only region to build lairs.
Yeah,
Just
definitely the
because
best.
you have so much time, because hunters can even jump you 3v1, and by the time it unlocks for hunters, one of the hunters can be battered clearing your trail, so it can be 2v1 again. And the thing is that you are so far away from hunters that it really downs their power of supplying, because one of or two hunters from Vienna need to move to clear your trail, but also other two hunters cannot just, okay, let's wait for Dracula, especially when Dracula starts incorporating layer strategies. A lot of, usually, I mean, when I was playing, it was rarely a case. Usually, Dracula was running away from the east to the open Europe, but then, two fresh hunters were waiting. So if there's a big threat of Dracula turning around and going back to the damaged and weakened hunters, those two hunters cannot just supply events and items for free. they still need to move toward you. And once they're close, you have actually fairly decent runway locations from through the sea. If you got a lot of influence points, you can basically turn to Pirate Dracula. And since you entered one of the edge seas, you have literally so much time you can waste on the sea and build some distance to wait for week four. Or you can try, something some classic Cagliari, or maybe some sneaky Adriatic Tyrrhenian stuff, Italy stuff, right? And also, one of the, in my opinion, great strengths of the Eastern Start is this is really early game region. Because again, it is not sneaky. It is really hard for hunters when horses are not working, but it is really good for hunters when horses are working. Basically, they can, from Sarajevo, they can reach almost anywhere.
Yeah.
With renewed vigor, they just need horse and a move, and they can reach from anywhere to anywhere. One surprising return, one location scouted can almost pinpoint your location.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, you mentioned this when we were talking about France in the in the
Yes.
recording. Like it's France, Germany. This is a place where you want to end the game because it's much easier to be stealthy, and the East is kind
Yeah.
of the type of place that you want to begin the game because there's no need to be stealthy, and like you said, it sets up more opportunities to create lairs, to run into hunters and have combats. Yeah. So really,
even
it does kind of
custom
seem like
can be
the
used
optimal Dracula strategy in a lot of ways is to start in the East and then try to make your escape to the West once the time has come. But obviously, every game is going to be different, and there's reasons why not every single Dracula is going to start in the East every single time. But it is a very nice place to be as Dracula when you're starting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think then the last thing here is just a kind of a discussion of the most commonly scouted cities. Now, this one is a little
you're
bit
right.
more reflective of the current meta game as of, I guess, April 2024 that we're recording this, or March when I made these slides. But just a quick discussion of what cities tend to be checked the most by hunters. And this is not actually a list of which cities are necessarily the best to check for hunters. It's more my observations of which ones do people check. And there's some overlap there. Obviously, a lot of these are important places to check. But probably the two most commonly scouted cities and like the classic recommendation for a new player if they draw hired scouts week one, they don't know what to do. You say, no, check Bari, check Valona, because that helps, check Italy and Austria. So two of the most popular extremity locations. If there's like two locations on the board, if you check Bari and Valona, then you've ruled out two of the hardest to reach cities on the board. So
Yeah.
pretty straightforward.
Amsterdam.
Galway, sometimes people check. I don't think personally, I don't like checking Ireland because it's not common that Dracula starts there, and it's like not that good of a start, even though it is like can be a very good way for Dracula to mature something. I don't think actually starting in Ireland is that smart usually to do. So I don't like checking it, but people do check Galway. They sometimes check Dublin just to rule it out. And also, the more importantly, like if Dracula is in Ireland, you'll know within a couple of turns that he was in Ireland because he has to go to sea.
Yeah, maybe not that he was in. It's not that you will know that he is in Ireland, but by the fourth hideout, you will know that he is not.
Exactly. Right.
If he's not there, because he will just put the fourth, location. And sometimes maturing is good and important, but sometimes it's not enough. If
Well,
mature
yeah, because with
costs
Ireland,
you
we
more-
discussed earlier, you pay for
Yeah.
that mature with a lot of C moves, which then waste
Yeah.
time and give away a big part of your strength, which is your trail. So, yeah, we covered that already.
Okay.
But yeah, other places to check. Oftentimes, assuming Van Helsing is in London, people will check Edinburgh just to make sure there's not a UK start happening. You might also want to check Swansea because that's the kind of other option for the Britain start. Obviously, Amsterdam, big one to check for the same reasons as Athens or as Bari and Valona, because they're extremity locations or they're cities that Dracula has to go through to get from an extremity. Hamburg also, I know you like starting there, so I think as a result of that, probably more hunters will check Hamburg. Strasbourg, this is more so one that you'll check if there's already a number of lairs or hideouts on the board. Because if Dracula is doing a Central Europe start, there's a good chance that he went through Strasbourg, and because it has so many connections, it just makes it a very convenient location to rule in or rule out. So if you find it, great. That tells you a lot. If you don't find it, that also kind of tells you a lot. And that might even be true if say that you know that you know that Dracula started in Amsterdam. You might draw scouts, check Strasbourg, because then again that gives you a lot of information about where he went next.
Yeah, if you find if he exited through Brussels or Cologne and he wasn't in Strasbourg, it actually like cuts his direction in half, right? It actually tells you a lot of his next hideouts.
Yeah. So that's an important. Again, you wouldn't if you draw scouts on turn 1 or 2, you wouldn't check Strasbourg, but turn 3, 4, 5, 6, then you definitely start to think about that. Nantes is another kind of mini extremity location that we mentioned, so people do check Nantes quite a bit. All 3 of the eastern cities, the 2 Black Sea cities and Galatz, those get checked now a lot because again the east is so powerful. Sofia is kind of the Strasbourg of the east, in that it has a lot of connections. It's very central, so people check that quite a bit later, like 2-3 turns in.
Yeah.
And,
so checking it like turn 1 or 2 also, because Dracula, if he wants to enter Salonika or Athens, they need to go through Valona or enter like from Valona or Sofia. Sometimes you can enter Varna from Sofia. So basically checking with if you get scouts turn 1, and if you check Valona and Sofia, you basically check Valona, Sofia, Salonika, and Athens.
Yeah,
quite efficient.
Frankfurt is another, a bit similar to Strasbourg in that it's well connected and central. Rome is another popular one to check a little bit later because maybe Dracula is not doing the Bari start, but he's doing a Naples start in hopes of avoiding the Scots hitting Bari, and then the hunters concluding that he's not in Italy. But if you check Rome after 3 turns or so, that will rule out Italy for sure. So that's a popular later one. And that's it.
Wait a second, because I wanted to say something about scouting too.
Oh yeah, go for it, dude.
I like how you noted. I think few of the scouts here are traps. I would say like Galway and Edinburgh are not the best scouting locations. Maybe even Hamburg. It depends, unless you're playing against me and you know my. Okay. There are scouts that are targeted against player that you know their preferences. I mean, then you're the expert. Like, we're not here to tell you how to beat specific player. I can tell you something about you if you want, but but in general, I would say you have 2.5 primary ways to find Dracula. First, location where he started. It is newspaper reports, it is scouting and searching with allies, and it is Jonathan Harker. So I would use the searching events to protect yourself against locations that revealing with newspapers or Harker is simply too late. So I would
your Valona,
scout
your Bari.
Yes. So I would use those scouting events. I say scouting events because this is like hired scouts, but also scouting with allies to protect yourself from non-start, Amsterdam start, Athens, Salonika, Varna, Constanta start.
Yeah.
Maybe it also depends on the events you have. And if you have charted courage, Constanta Galatz is not a big issue, even if you reveal it last day, right? If you have excellent weather, maybe Amsterdam is a little bit easier to reach than Athens. If you have sense of emergency, one move to Zagreb, sense of emergency. And so it is a little bit flexible, but and obviously Italy. So I would use those events to complement each other. Even if you don't get newspapers by the first 3-4 turns, they can still show up on the 5th and 6th turn, and sometimes even revealing them on the last day. Even if you reveal only the third hideout, sometimes they can tell you a lot about the classic start. Oh, they started Amsterdam, right? Or I scouted those locations and newspaper revealed that, so I can deduce where he didn't and where he maybe did start.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, to bring it back to Dracula, you can kind of keep in mind that those are the types of locations that hunters are prone to check
Yeah,
and take advantage of
yeah.
that. You know, move there, don't move there. Think about what encounters you place there, and so forth. So, yeah. Well, again, I think that this video is gonna come in close to 2 hours, and that's pretty long. So
Yeah.
I think we should wrap it up. But
Yeah.
thank you for co-commentating. And thank you,
And
everybody, for watching. I will tag you
yeah,
in the comments, try to put a link to your Dracula Classes video, as well as a link to Scott Sword's Hunter
sure.
Starts video. All of that
Thank you.
is very
And
relevant stuff. But yeah,
thank you for having me. It was really cool stuff to do, really cool stuff to talk.
yeah,
And
always fun.
I find it funny how we were constantly interrupting each other, since I don't really know, I didn't know exactly the ordering of what was your plan of the slide,
Right.
so I didn't exactly knew, where you want to jump and all that. But I mean,
Well,
that's the thing. As Dracula, you need to be flexible and you need to thrive in chaos. So
yeah.
if people don't like how this is a little bit of a chaotic and back and forth, then you know what? I would say you go with your hunter spirit. You go to Scott Sword. He has very neat, very clean, very well organized guides, and maybe they will suit you better.
Yeah, I think that's right. Although, well, it's funny because you also do like to stress in your videos how important planning is for Dracula. But in this case, I did send you the slideshow, so you had the opportunity to plan. But I guess you prefer the chaos. But,
Yeah, but you need to
no,
plan to create chaos, you know? You
yeah,
need to.
it's
That's
more
the
fun
thing
that
with
way, and
Dracula.
I like fun. I don't know about you, but I do like fun.
Oh,
Um,
I think I'm a little bit of. I hope I'm a little bit famous for liking fun.
Oh, absolutely. I think you're known the world over, or at least Europe over. From Athens to Galway, tales
Yeah.
of your love of fun abound. Anyway, again, we're coming in at a pretty long video time here, so thank you everyone for watching, and please leave your comments. Let us know if there's anything we missed, and again, yeah, thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful.